back to another episode of Geeks, hosted down in sunny SoCal, where we delve into the complexities of the current energy climate and work to inform the general public through simple conversation. I'm excited to say that today's episode will be a bit of a longer one, where I and hopefully you, the viewer, will be learning a bit more about the modern day electricity and natural gas infrastructure system. Now, this is going to be a little bit tricky. I think we're all well aware that we use electricity and natural gas in our day-to-day lives, but we take it for granted. It's hard to imagine a world without these energy carriers. I'm proud to say that I'm not feeling particularly lonely today, since I'm joined by four energy experts who are joining me here at the studio. I'll take us around the circle just to get everyone introduced. First off, we have Renzo, hailing from the Golden Gate Bridge, who will be taking us through the origins of our electricity system. Please introduce the audience to your voice and yourself.
Thank you, Luke, for having me. I'm very excited to be on this week's episode, and I've actually been a fan for a while. For everyone listening, my name is Renzo Backus, and I'm an environmental historian. To elaborate a little more on what that means, essentially what I do is I look at how our world has changed and been altered throughout history through the lens of things like natural resources, climate, and the general environment. Pretty boring stuff, but for most, I really love it. And I think it's vital when we talk about anything regarding energy use.
All right. Next, we have Sophie from the town of Landfair in the great state of Westwood, who has been a grid operator for 30 years now. She'll be taking us through the state of the system now, coupled with many of the problems that we see in it today. How are you doing today? And tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Hi there. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for hosting us. Yeah, like you said, I'm a grid operator at PG&E, and I've been in this game for years. Working for PG&E was my dream job. I mean, wouldn't anyone want to work for a government-sanctioned monopoly? California state law literally guarantees us profits. Talk about job security. I'm excited to be on the show and discuss the current state of things. Spoiler alert, our grid is falling apart, as well as why it's such a big problem for users and how we utilities continue to profit.
Right. And then here we have Mona, who will be going over some current developments in the energy system. How are things developing for you?
Hi, Luke. It's great to be here today. I'm actually part of the governor-elected PUC here in California, and I, along with Sophie, will be talking to you all a little bit more about how our energy system is structured today.
Very nice. Last but not least, we'll have Andy, holder of a degree in theoretical physics, here to talk to us about the future trajectories that these developments could take us in. Speak into the mic, please.
Sure. Actually, I don't have a degree in theoretical physics. I have a theoretical degree in physics. I've done some work with some energy models, Greater LA native, and I'm happy to have the honor to close off this podcast today. And yeah, I think you'll pick up a bit on how difficult it is to see the future of our energy system.
And with that, we'll transition away to a short break before we move on to the next session. Let's get this started in a bit, Renzo. Welcome back, everyone. We will now be transitioning to origins of our infrastructure. Renzo, many people assume it evolved naturally due to cost effectiveness and efficiency, but you've uncovered a different truth. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely, Luke. It's a common misconception, to be fair. I stumbled upon a remarkable paper by Andreas Malm titled The Origins of Fossil Capital from Water to Steam in the British Cotton Industry. And in this, he dismantles the myth that the switch to fossil fuels happened naturally. In the late 18th century, when coal-powered steam engines emerged, actually they were more expensive than water power, both in terms of initial investment and per horsepower.
Interesting. So it wasn't just a logical necessity?
Precisely. Malm's research indicates that there was room for more water power, which was even more powerful than steam at the time. And the real motivation behind the transition ultimately boiled down to capitalism.
Capitalism?
Yes, the rise of capitalism shaped this transition. Steam engines fueled by coal allowed factories to move into urban centers, providing access to a larger labor force. Unlike water streams, steam engines weren't reliant on external factors like weather or seasons, making them an attractive option for capitalists keen on maximizing profits.
So it was more about positioning factories strategically to capitalize on available labor.
Absolutely. Maul makes reference to John McCulloch, a leading economist back then, who highlights this perfectly. McCulloch exposes the reality that steam engines allowed factories to be placed where the labor force was, rather than near waterfalls. This, combined with the flexibility and consistent power supply of steam engines, was the golden ticket for profit-hungry capitalists.
Well, that sheds a different light on the origins of our energy systems. How does this historical context connect to our current infrastructure heavily reliant on fossil fuels?
It's all tied together. The roots of our infrastructures dependent on fossil fuels trace back to capitalism's pursuit of profit. Today, our infrastructure is entangled with products and systems reliant on fossil fuels due to this historical trajectory driven by an insatiable appetite for more profit.
Thanks for unpacking that, Renzo. It's fascinating to see how history influences our energy landscape today. Now let's dive into the history of our grid systems. How did the grid as we know it come to be?
Well, Luke, it's a really interesting story that traces back to a mix of greed and the pursuit of profit again, much like what we've seen in the evolution of our natural gas and oil infrastructure. A good friend of mine, Gretchen Bakke, delves deep into this in her book, The Grid. She lays out the fractured and disorganized nature of the early grid. Picture this. So back in the late 1800s, there were so many small private grids that they essentially cluttered the Manhattan skyline with wires and infrastructure, making it nearly impossible to see. If you just imagine a sprawling tree with branches covering every street corner. This just shows how dysfunctional our electrical system was and how different it is from what we have today.
That's quite an exclusive beginning for something we now consider a basic necessity. Any specific figures that influenced this development?
Absolutely. One significant figure was Samuel Insull, whose rise to power is detailed in Bakke's book again. Insull, starting as Edison's assistant, evolved into a pivotal figure as the electrical industry became more focused on business rather than invention. He sought to create a monopoly similar to what Standard Oil had achieved. Moving to Chicago in the 1890s, Insull took control of the local Edison franchise. But he had a problem, which was both competition and underutilization of his plant.
So how did Insull tackle these challenges?
He slashed electrical prices drastically, making it more affordable for the masses. This allowed him to widen his base of customers with essentially no drawbacks, as the costs to run the plant were relatively the same, whether it was on 100% of the day or just 1%. Additionally, he introduced off-peak load power to industrial customers, prioritizing their benefits over residential and commercial consumers. This essentially meant that during time of day like the morning, when most people were not using electricity, he made the prices cheaper to entice the industrial sector. Insull also leveraged the government to impede competition, securing loans and establishing dominance. Eventually, this led to the consolidation of the industry as others across the country looked at Insull's methods and copied him. Just 2 decades after Insull arrived in Chicago, 10 companies suddenly controlled 75% of the electricity industry in America.
Wow, that's a significant shift. How did this infrastructure connect to both urban and rural areas?
Interestingly, their early focus wasn't on rural areas due to the lack of profitability owing to low population density. The urban landscape, on the other hand, provided a lucrative customer base due to its compactness and larger population.
So the grid's evolution stemmed from the profit motives rather than a desire to improve lives or the environment.
Precisely, Luke. It seems both our natural gas and electrical infrastructure had roots in profit-driven motives rather than altruistic intentions for societal betterment. It really was never about innovation and a better life for all, but the insatiable desire for more and more wealth.
Thank you, Renzo, for unraveling the intriguing origins of our grid systems.
My pleasure, Luke. It's fascinating to see how our past decisions continue to shape our present energy landscapes, and specifically how common notions that the general public holds about past events are not always accurate.
All right, fascinating stuff there. So we now know how we ended up with the grid infrastructure as it is today. Sophie, would you be able to tell us a bit about the business side of things? What is the utility business model?
I'm so glad you asked, Luke, because the utility business model is genius. It's notorious and it's 100 years old, which makes it a lot like the late Henry Kissinger. Rest in peace. Like Renzo here just told us, our hero, Samuel Insull, got real cozy with the government pretty early on. And now utilities are in a serious situationship with the feds. For-profit utilities like PG&E are simply just regulated monopolies because we are partially vertically integrated. The federal government promises us assured service areas where no competition can move in. See why I wanted to work for a utility? They're like the Fed's first child, overprotected and completely unaccountable to their mistakes.
As a first child, I'm personally offended.
Well, don't be, because you do get a pretty sweet deal. Renzo here told us all about how early grid operators started making a profit by selling lots of electricity at a really low price, right? Nowadays, utilities make money by investing in infrastructure like transmission lines. And I should clarify that I'm talking specifically about private utilities here. You know, investor-owned giants like PG&E. We are proudly obligated to our shareholders and guarantee them a 10% profit when they invest in grid infrastructure. Then we have the public utilities, which are like the annoying saintly middle child. They care way too much about quality service and community involvement. Here at PG&E, we are proud to say that our first priority is the bottom line, making money. And to all our listeners, you folks are fantastic. You make us rich. We charge a bit extra for electricity, a little more than the grid costs to build, and voila, our execs pocket hefty checks. Investors keep on pouring money in, and we keep expanding the grid. The money machine rolls on. A genius business model, as I said.
Huh. So utilities are legally safeguarded from competition? That seems questionable.
Indeed.
Well, what about the Public Utility Regulatory Act? Didn't it pass in 1978 with the goal of opening up the market for competition? Doesn't it allow independent generators to add power to the grid?
PURPA. I get a headache every time someone brings it up. And those damn CCAs. CCAs or community choice aggregates, more like, come on, can't you find your own money pool to play in? They're real pests. Under PURPA, they operate in IOU territory, acting as an alternative for consumers, buying power and reselling it to our customers.
Oh, cool. So has that provision allowed solar and wind companies to offer clean energy to climate conscious consumers?
No comment.
Are you a climate denier?
No comment.
All right, let's take a moment to cool off. We'll be right back in a second. And we're back. Let's wrap up the conversation about the current grid by talking about some of its biggest problems. Sophie, can you comment on what is difficult about running such an antiquated and extensive system?
As an employee of PG&E, I'm contractually unable to discuss company operations publicly. It could lead to bad publicity.
But you're the expert.
Well, luckily, my good friend ChatGPT here can help answer your question. ChatGPT, what are some of the biggest problems with today's grid? Let's see. My friend Chat says that today's grid suffers from frequent power outages and blackouts that have a disproportionate impact on low-income communities.
Uh-huh. Can you ask that chat what is the cause of these blackouts?
Certainly. Chat says that equipment failures are causing the blackouts.
Interesting. So PG&E's lack of maintenance leads to infrastructure failures and subsequent grid shutdowns?
That's what Chat says, yep. Oh, look, he's still typing. He says storms, high winds, heavy rainfall, and wildfires also contribute significantly to these outages.
Speaking of climate impact, a recent paper in the Journal of Energy Policy by Stephanie Pinsettle and Eric Fournier at UCLA highlights the effects of high heat on energy infrastructure.
Oh, really? What did they find?
Well, high heat reduces generation plant capacity and transmission line performance. Given climate change, we can expect more and more blackouts.
Huh. So our power lines don't perform as well in high heat? How did they even figure that out?
Oh, they use climate projections, spatial data sets, and forecasts of peak electricity demands to estimate vulnerabilities in the state's electricity infrastructure. They actually found that heat waves could slash grid lines' capacity up to 20%.
But aren't grid lines PG&E's primary source of income?
Precisely. So, with increased demand and reduced capacity projected, PG&E might need to boost capacity and improve grid stability.
Well, who's going to pay for all that? We'll have to raise rates.
Didn't you mention your executives rake in huge salaries? Yeah, I just looked it up. Your CEO makes 50 million a year.
Oh, I know how we'll pay for grid updates. All these people driving electric cars, they have to charge them somewhere, right? PG&E can supply electricity for all your new electrical appliances. In fact, we're planning to incorporate 27 gigawatts of power from new natural gas power plants. So don't worry, we'll just build new power lines and make sure every home, every business, and every building is hooked up.
Well, actually, Pinsetto's paper mentions that natural gas plants are sensitive to rising temperatures and that they require more land space than solar PV systems, which can be installed on roofs of existing buildings.
Solar? Yeah, it's a neat idea, but the study also says that the combined cost of solar and energy storage is still significantly higher than burning natural gas to make electricity. So we'd rather just keep things running, business as usual. Let the CCAs try and make money in solar and see where they get.
What they get is billions of dollars in federal tax rebates for providing clean energy to their consumers. Last I heard, CCAs are on the rise, and PG&E is one of the worst rated utilities in the country.
Huh. As long as I get my paycheck.
All right, Sophie, thank you for shedding light on how the grid works today. We've learned about PG&E's infrastructural failures and how climate events threaten grid stability. Next up, let's hear from our developmental expert about some exciting transformations that might help us address some of these challenges. Welcome back, everyone. Today's episode dives into the intricate world of energy systems, and I'm thrilled to have Mona here with us to unpack some groundbreaking research. Can you walk us through with the key components on how electricity gets from generation to our homes?
Absolutely, Luke. The journey of electricity involves three main stages: generation or production, transmission, and distribution. Investor-owned utilities usually control all these stages, while some publicly owned utilities manage the entire process.
That's quite a grip on the entire system. What's involved in the transmission and distribution?
It's quite intricate. The process includes substations that receive electricity from main generators, feeder lines spanning 5 to 10 miles from substations, lateral lines transporting electricity to customers, and lastly, service drop lines delivering power to individual homes.
Sounds like quite the intricate network. How are prices and regulations managed within the system?
So the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission regulates transmission and wholesale prices at the federal level, while state public utility commissioners oversee distribution and retail electricity prices. This involves overseeing various types of utilities, the IOUs, which serve the majority of customers and are regulated by state PUCs, and publicly owned utilities, often exempt from state regulation.
That's a complex governance structure. What about the energy sources contributing to our grid?
It varies across states, but in California, for instance, nearly half the electricity comes from renewable sources like hydroelectric power, small scale and customer-sided solar power. The other half is mainly from natural gas, with a smaller portion from nuclear power. Pricing heavily relies on fuel costs, with coal being cheaper than gas.
So reliability is key. How do we ensure that during peak times our system can handle that demand?
Indeed, the reliability of our energy system depends on the adequacy of generation and transmission capacities, along with the reliability of transmission and distribution. Ensuring our transmission lines can handle peak energy demand without causing grid shutdowns is crucial.
And in this evolving landscape, how has the management and structure of utilities changed?
Power pools, which were once prevalent, are now being replaced by power exchanges for wholesale marketing. This process, called restructuring, allows customers to choose suppliers freely, with independent system operators, ISOs, managing transmission scheduling, ensuring fair representation for all market participants.
That's quite the transformation. It's fascinating to see how our electricity systems have evolved. Moving on, your recent research on the energy system has been making waves. Could you walk us through some of the critical findings you've uncovered?
Absolutely, Luke. In my research, I've unearthed some pressing concerns that pose challenges to our transition to cleaner energy. One of the significant issues centers around the social impact of our energy transition. Since there are tens of thousands of workers in non-renewable sectors such as coal and natural gas power plants, these workers will need to shift to green economy jobs in a way that is just and relatively undisrupted to their lives and their families' lives. Taking into account the fact that poor and working communities will be tremendously affected is the first step to what we call a just transition. These workers cannot be left alone on their own to cope with job search, new skills training, and other drastic changes to their lives. The government, non-governmental entities, and the public must all step in to help them. A great example outlined in the paper, A Just Transition, Why Transitioning Workers into a New Clean Energy Economy Should Be at the Center of Climate Change Policies by J. Minjin Cha, is the state of New York. Governor Cuomo's Clean Climate Careers initiatives is an incredible stepping stone towards a just transition. It touches almost on every aspect, including the ones I just mentioned, by incorporating the public sector, namely increasing investments in energy efficiency and public buildings, partnering with non-governmental organizations to take on energy-related projects through PLAs, which are project labor agreements, a pre-hire contract between the union and the contractor company, and provides workforce development and training to prepare workers for the clean energy economy.
Those are significant roadblocks indeed. What about the production of essential materials like steel, aluminum, and concrete?
Yes, Luke. Manufacturing these fundamental materials traditionally relies on energy-intensive processes, often fueled by fossil energy sources. For example, fossil fuels plays a pivotal role in the production of concrete, primarily through the involvement in cement manufacturing, the key component of concrete. Firstly, limestone, a key raw material, undergoes calcination, a process requiring high temperature achieved through the combustion of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels provide the necessary heat energy for cement kilns, where temperature must reach around 1,450 Celsius to facilitate chemical reactions. The transportation of raw materials to manufacturing plants and the distribution of finished cement to construction sites further rely on fossil fuel-powered vehicles. Moreover, electricity essential for various cement production operations is often generated using fossil fuels. Although there is a growing emphasis on sustainable practices and the exploration of alternative materials and energy sources, fossil fuels still significantly contribute to the carbon footprint associated with concrete production. Initiatives to enhance energy efficiency, use alternative fuels, and adopt eco-friendly practices within the construction industry are essential for mitigating the environmental impacts of fossil fuels reliance in concrete production.
Wow, your research highlights critical aspects often overlooked in the energy transition discourse. Thank you for shedding light on these vital concerns, Mona.
It's my pleasure, Luke. These challenges require collective action and innovative solutions to pave the way for a sustainable and equitable energy future.
Welcome back, everyone. We are here with our last section of today's podcast, or anyways, the last one where I'll be talking to an expert before wrapping things up. And here we are with Andy Fung, our theoretical physicist.
Well, I'm a physicist theoretically. I'm taking a lower division physics class at UCLA right now.
Right. So I've heard that you've been taking a look into the way that the energy system, as we talked about earlier, has developed. I know it's a bit of a hard question to answer. Fortune telling is a dying industry, but I'm sure the world's best and brightest have been able to find a way to map out a way forward for a cleaner grid that serves everyone, right?
Yeah, you're not too far off. Researchers have actually been able to create computer models to show how such a change, such a transition could happen.
Sure. So could you explain a little more to make sure we're on the same page here?
Sure. So energy grids, right? It's just sort of about supply and demand. How much energy do people need, and how much is being produced and distributed. So we just sort of go and make assumptions about how these will change in the near future, usually based on how quickly these things have been changing in the past. So like we'll see how quickly solar panels or wind turbines, electric vehicles, and some other things that are going to be a part of the energy transition have been implemented, and we put that into a computer model. I don't know too much about the specifics of the math behind these models, but we see that these clean, very electric technologies have been growing exponentially, and they will likely continue to do so for the near future.
Really?
Yeah. In short, the forecast for our energy future is very electric and very renewable. But we also see that the total amount of energy that we're going to have to use or that we're going to use is going to have to decline.
I guess that's assuming we want to have clean air to breathe and stable climate to live in.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about this from a pretty abstract, zoomed out type of way. Do you have anything specific that you want to point us toward to learn a little bit more?
Yeah, so I did have something in mind. LA native, right? So um Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. So, they're the ones who run the grid for basically most of the city of LA. And back in 2021, they released their report aptly titled LA 100, the Los Angeles 100% Renewable Energy Study.
I wonder what that's about.
Right, good question. So basically, it keeps in mind that LA has a goal to reach 100% clean energy by 2045, and it includes several scenarios where this happens. Um, and going back to the whole supply and demand thing, they make different assumptions for both in each of these scenarios. So, for example, some of these scenarios focus on, a supply of electricity that's mostly renewable with soaring demands because there's a lot more electrification. Others might consider supply of electricity that's completely renewable, but they also employ more efficient practices, and they might have different infrastructure or excuse me, different transmission infrastructure options. So this just sort of lets you compare different approaches to how LA can achieve 100% clean electricity, right? So, we can say, oh, if we build more transmission, then we have planned and transition to 100% renewables, we'll have better outcomes than if we don't build that transmission and transition to 80% renewables. But that might cost a bit more. So overall, we see lower greenhouse gas emissions and better health benefits if we hit 100% clean energy, or I should say renewable energy earlier, and especially if high efficiency practices and technologies are used. So, up front, it might cost a little bit more, but if you look at the health benefits and the job benefits, those definitely outweigh the initial costs.
Wow.
Yeah, so studies like these show that such a change really is possible and affordable, even if it's difficult and not cheap. Still, there are some very clear benefits, right? It might be more expensive to not do it, again, because of the, health and pollution benefits.
Well, that's reassuring.
Right. But I do have my problems with the study and some others like it. So, how should I put this? So they simply don't really acknowledge some of the political and social struggles with the current grid, right? Like not too long ago, back in the summer of 2022, if I'm not mistaken. I and many other Californians living in the LA area had to, like, they sent us a text telling us to lower electricity usage um, at like 5 or 6 p.m. because, you know, the grid was going to collapse if we didn't. And I believe that it really shouldn't have to come to that, right? Like, there should be a lot more efforts to make sure it doesn't have to come to having to DM or slide into the DMs of every single person living in Los Angeles. And these models really just don't account for outages like those, and especially the social effects of those outages.
Oh, what are the roadblocks to the issues with the current energy system?
Right. So, so there are definitely a couple of issues. So first of all, we have the fact that there's so many industries that are entrenched in the grid at the moment, right? There's a lot of money behind it. And there's also the fact that there's really no one else outside of these industries who have the experience to run the whole system, right? Um, like you were talking to Sophie, for instance, and it seems like she has some antiquated opinions on how this grid can be run, but that's all we really have to work with at the moment, unless you want to put in more people into the education pipeline. There's also the matter of how we're going to make things like steel, aluminum, concrete, things like that, things that are really essential to urban life without fossil energy, and instead only depending on electricity, right? Like Mona talked about this a bit earlier, I believe, and it's just a matter of making sure that we have these solutions in place. Like I believe hydrogen would be one example of a solution in this case. And last but not least, we also have the fact that, you know, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be unemployed because of this transition, right? Like, you know, people like fossil fuel workers who won't really have, you know, natural gas or other resources to exploit, and people in those entrenched industries, like I talked about earlier. We're going to have to find ways to help them adapt to this transition because, you know, they just simply won't have a job, and we're just going to have a bunch of people, like thousands of people unemployed. That would just make it, you know, really unpopular, and that's not something that models can really simulate, right? That's a matter of policy, something that we have to keep in mind as we look into the future.
All right, Andy. Well, thank you for the meaningful response. Sounds like there's a lot more than meets the eye when it comes to talking about issues like that. There's more to it than just the amount of money and how fast it'll take. I think we have a bit of a better understanding now of just how much of an effort it'll be. And with that, we'll move on to a break before closing off for today. Welcome back for the last time, everyone. It's time for us to wrap this up, this enlightening discussion on our energy system. We've traveled through the past, present, and future of our grid systems, exploring the complex web of challenges and possibilities. Renzo, what struck you the most about the origins of our energy infrastructure?
That would have to be the undeniable thread of profit weaving through its history. It's clear that the initial designs weren't about improving lives, but rather about feeding the insatiable appetite for wealth. This also echoes in today's challenges too.
Huh. Sophie, your insights into the utility business model shed light on its profit-driven structure. Any key takeaway you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Yeah. Well, remember, utilities aren't always about the bottom line. The social and environmental impacts of their decisions do affect us all, and understanding their role is crucial in driving positive change.
Mona, your research highlighted social aspects often overlooked in the energy transition. What do you want people to remember?
The transition should not leave anyone behind. A just shift to cleaner energy must ensure support for workers and communities affected by these changes. Equity must be at the forefront.
Huh. And then there's Andy, the theoretical physicist in training. You've explored pathways to a cleaner grid. What's the takeaway from your perspective?
Well, theoretically, transitioning to cleaner energy is feasible, as shown by computer models, but what these models don't show is that they always involve tough decisions and societal shifts. It's all about balancing, technological advancement with our social and political realities.
Absolutely. Well, our journey today showcased the intricacies of our energy systems, from the profit motives that birthed our grids to the current challenges and future possibilities. Change isn't just about infrastructure, it's about navigating societal, political, and environmental landscapes. We've heard about LADWP's LA 100 report, pathways to cleaner energy, and the imperative to tackle social and economic aspects. It's evident that a transition demands more than technological advancements. It requires inclusivity and equity. As we conclude, I'd like to express my gratitude to all of our guests today for their profound insights. Join us next time as we continue to unravel the ever-evolving world of energy. Remember, change isn't just about improving infrastructure, it's about navigating the societal, political, and environmental landscape. Thank you all for listening.